The gunshot echoed through Ruby City's dusty Main Street, just as Natalie Foster grabbed her carpetbag and ran toward the departing train, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribcage. She didn't look back at the saloon where her employer lay bleeding, didn't stop to explain to anyone why the respectable schoolteacher was fleeing Idaho territory like a common criminal. She just ran, her boots kicking up red dust, her dark hair falling loose from its pins as she reached the train platform and practically threw herself onto the steps of the last passenger car. The conductor barely glanced at her ticket as she stumbled inside, breathing hard, her hands shaking as she found an empty bench near the back. Through the smudged window, she could see men gathering outside the saloon, could hear shouting even over the train's engine. Any moment now, someone would point toward the station. Any moment now, they would realize she had witnessed everything. She pressed herself into the corner of the wooden seat, trying to make herself small, invisible. The train lurched forward with a blast of steam and the screech of metal wheels on metal tracks. Natalie closed her eyes and exhaled, feeling tears prick at her eyelids. She was 22 years old, alone in the world, and now she was running from something she hadn't even done. All she had seen was the card game go wrong, seen the flash of a knife, seen blood spread across the poker table like spilled wine. The man who had done it, a cattle baron's son named Dixon Merrill, had looked right at her as she stood frozen in the doorway. His eyes had promised silence or death. So she ran. The passenger car was perhaps half full, mostly men in dusty traveling clothes, a few women in modest dresses clutching children. No one paid her much attention, which was exactly what she needed. Natalie tucked her carpetbag beneath her feet and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She had $43 to her name, the last of her teaching salary. She had no family, no destination, no plan beyond getting as far from Ruby City as the rails would take her. She was so lost in her spiraling thoughts that she didn't notice the man until he was standing right beside her bench, his shadow falling across her lap. This seat taken. Natalie's head snapped up, her hand instinctively moving to the small knife she kept hidden in her skirt pocket. But the man standing there didn't look threatening. He was tall and lean, probably around 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He wore typical cowboy attire: worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, scuffed boots with spurs that clinked softly with each movement. A hat dangled from one hand, and his eyes were an unusual shade of amber brown, warm and somehow concerned as they took in her obvious distress. Natalie started to say the seat was saved, to turn him away, but something in his expression stopped her. He looked kind. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at her with simple, uncomplicated kindness. "No, it's not taken." "Good." He settled onto the bench beside her with the easy grace of someone who spent more time in a saddle than a chair. The train was picking up speed now, the buildings of Ruby City falling away behind them, replaced by scrubland and distant mountains. "I saw you running for the train." "Looked like you were running from something." Natalie stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." "Peace, miss, I'm not asking questions." He set his hat on his knee and turned slightly to face her. "Name's Thomas Vance. Most folks call me Tom. I'm a rancher, or I was until the drought killed most of my herd last summer. Now I'm heading to Colorado to see about work with my cousin's outfit." She studied him carefully, looking for deception or hidden motives, but his face was open, honest in a way that seemed almost old-fashioned. "Natalie Foster," she said finally. "I was a school teacher in Ruby City." Things changed. She looked away out the window where the landscape was beginning to shift from high desert to something slightly greener. "I needed to leave." Tom was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was low enough that only she could hear over the train's rhythmic clatter. "Nobody travels solo today. Excuse me. That's what my mother used to say." She believed that everyone needed someone watching their back, especially when times got hard. He met her eyes steadily. "I saw you get on this train, Miss Foster. Saw you running like the devil himself was after you. Saw you sit down here all alone, looking scared enough to jump right out of your skin. Now, I don't know what you're running from, and I won't ask unless you want to tell me. But I figure nobody should have to travel alone when they're that frightened." Natalie felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had built up over years of being alone. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Vance, but I couldn't possibly impose on a stranger. Not imposing if I'm offering." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, made him look younger and somehow more certain all at once. "Besides, we're both heading in the same direction. Might as well keep each other company. These trains can be dangerous for a woman traveling alone." She knew he was right. She had heard the stories, the warnings from other women about thieves and worse who preyed on lone travelers. And there was something about Thomas Vance that made her want to trust him, want to believe that not everyone in this hard world was out to hurt her. "All right," she said softly. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while after that, but it was a comfortable silence, not the awkward kind that demanded to be filled with meaningless chatter. The train carried them westward, away from Ruby City, and into the wider territory. Other passengers dozed or talked quietly among themselves. A baby cried somewhere up front, then settled. The sun moved slowly across the sky, painting the world outside in shades of gold and amber. After perhaps an hour, Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a cloth bundle. "You hungry? I've got some bread and cheese. Not much, but it's fresh enough." Natalie's stomach growled in response, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since early morning. "I couldn't take your food." "You're not taking it. I'm sharing it." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a good-sized piece of bread and a wedge of pale yellow cheese. He broke both in half with his hands and offered her the larger portions. "Please. You look like you need it more than I do." She accepted the food with trembling fingers, suddenly aware of how hungry she actually was, how the fear and adrenaline had masked her body's basic needs. The bread was dense and filling, the cheese sharp and satisfying. They ate together in that same comfortable silence, and Natalie felt some of the tension begin to drain from her shoulders. "So where are you heading?" Tom asked eventually, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "If you don't mind my asking." "I don't know," Natalie admitted. "I bought a ticket as far as the money would take me. I suppose I'll figure it out when I get there." "Well, there are worse ways to travel." He leaned back against the seat, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "Sometimes not knowing where you're going is better than being stuck where you've been." She looked at him curiously. "You sound like you have experience with that." "Some." His expression grew distant. "I was born in Texas, raised on a ranch that my father built from nothing. He died when I was 17, left the place to me and my sister. She married a banker from Austin and moved to the city. Didn't want anything to do with ranch life. I tried to keep it going on my own, but between the drought and the cattle thieves and the banks always wanting their money, I lost it all about 3 months ago." "I'm sorry," Natalie said, and she meant it. She could hear the pain in his voice, the loss of something that had meant everything to him. "It's life in the West, I suppose. Nothing's guaranteed out here." He turned to look at her again, and there was something searching in his gaze. "What about you? What made you become a teacher?" Natalie hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but there was something about Tom that invited confidence, made her want to share the truth. "I didn't have much choice. My parents died of fever when I was 15. They left me with nothing but debts. A charitable woman in Boise paid for me to attend normal school, train as a teacher. It was that or work in a laundry, and I wanted something more. Teaching's honorable work. It was. She twisted her hands in her lap, the memory of the saloon flooding back. But small towns don't pay much, and when the school couldn't afford to keep me on full time, I took work keeping books for the saloon owner. That's where I was this afternoon when. She trailed off, unsure how much to say. When you saw something you shouldn't have seen, Tom finished quietly. She nodded, grateful that he understood without making her spell it out. A man died. The one who did it, he has powerful friends. I couldn't stay. Tom's expression hardened. Did he threaten you? He didn't have to. I saw it in his eyes. Natalie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. So I ran. You did the right thing. Tom's hand moved as if to touch hers, then stopped, hovering in the space between them before falling back to his side. A man like that with power and no conscience, he's dangerous. Getting away was smart. It doesn't feel smart. It feels like cowardice. Surviving isn't cowardice, Miss Foster. It's courage. His voice was firm, certain. And starting over takes even more courage than staying. They talked as the afternoon wore into evening, the conversation flowing more easily than Natalie would have thought possible with a stranger. Tom told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to rope cattle before he could properly read, about his mother who had died birthing a baby that didn't survive either. Natalie shared memories of her childhood in Boise, of her father who had been a clerk and her mother who had taken in sewing, of the small house that had always smelled like fresh bread and lavender. The train stopped at a small depot as the sun was setting, just long enough for passengers to stretch their legs and for the crew to take on water. Tom helped Natalie down from the train car, his hand warm and steady on her elbow. They walked along the platform together, and Natalie realized she felt safer than she had in months, maybe years. Tom didn't crowd her or try to control her movements. He simply walked beside her, a solid presence that asked for nothing but offered everything. We'll be traveling through the night, Tom said as they climbed back aboard. The next major stop isn't until tomorrow afternoon. You should try to sleep if you can. What about you? I'll keep watch. He smiled at her startled expression. Not because I don't trust you, Miss Foster. Because I want to make sure nobody bothers you while you rest. Natalie felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but something more than that. Something that made her pulse quicken and her cheeks flush. That's very kind of you, Mr. Vance. Tom, he corrected gently. Please. Tom. She tried out the name, like the way it felt on her tongue. And you should call me Natalie. Natalie. He said it like a promise, like something precious. That's a beautiful name. She settled into the corner of the bench as the train lurched back into motion. The darkness outside now complete, except for occasional lights from distant homesteads. The car grew quieter as other passengers dozed. True to his word, Tom stayed awake, his body angled slightly toward hers in a way that was both protective and respectful. Natalie found her eyelids growing heavy, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with her. The last thing she was aware of before sleep claimed her was the feeling of something soft being draped over her shoulders. Tom's jacket, still warm from his body, smelling of leather and sage and something indefinably masculine. She woke sometime in the deep hours of the night to find her head had drifted sideways, coming to rest against Tom's shoulder. She should have jerked away, should have apologized for the impropriety. But Tom's head had tipped down toward hers, and in the dim light from the car's oil lamps, she could see that he had fallen asleep too, his features soft and peaceful. Without thinking, she let herself stay there, let herself take comfort in his warmth and solidity. Just for a few more minutes, she told herself. Just until morning, when dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Natalie carefully sat up, not wanting to disturb Tom. But he stirred anyway, his eyes opening slowly, and for just a moment before full consciousness returned, he smiled at her with such warmth and gentleness that it made her heart skip. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "You sleep all right, better than I have in weeks." It was the truth. "Thank you for keeping watch. Looks like I didn't do such a good job of it," he gestured to himself, clearly embarrassed that he had dozed off. "Some guard I turned out to be. I think you did just fine." Natalie handed him back his jacket, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The touch sent a small shock through her system, something electric and alive. From the way Tom's eyes widened slightly, she thought he might have felt it too. The morning brought new energy to the train car. People stretched and talked, children grew restless, and the smell of someone's breakfast bread made everyone's stomach growl. Tom produced another cloth bundle from his pack, this one containing strips of dried beef and some slightly wizened apples. "Last of my provisions," he said, offering half to Natalie. "After this, we'll need to buy something at the next depot." "I have a little money," Natalie said. "I should pay for my share." "You'll do no such thing." Tom's tone was firm but not unkind. "I invited myself into your journey, remember. Least I can do is help with the provisions." They ate while watching the landscape change outside the window, the high desert giving way to foothills and then to proper mountains. The train climbed steadily, the engine working harder, belching great clouds of black smoke that occasionally drifted past the windows. Other passengers pointed out landmarks, named peaks and valleys, shared stories of the territories they were passing through. "Have you ever been to Colorado?" Natalie asked. "Once, when I was younger. My father took me to Denver to sell cattle. It seemed like the biggest, busiest place in the world." Tom smiled at the memory. "Of course, I was only 12 at the time. Everything seemed big then. What's your cousin's ranch like?" "Last I heard, it was doing well. He's got about 200 head of cattle, some horses, good grazing land. He wrote me after he heard about my place going under, said there was always work for me if I needed it." Tom's expression grew thoughtful. "Wasn't sure I'd take him up on it." "Pride, I suppose. But pride doesn't pay bills or fill stomachs." Natalie understood that bone deep. She had swallowed her own pride plenty of times, taken jobs that didn't suit her, smiled when she wanted to scream, all for the sake of survival. "There's no shame in accepting help from family." "No, I suppose there isn't." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that was deeper than words. "What will you do when you reach the end of the line? Find work, I suppose. Maybe there's a town that needs a teacher or someone who needs a clerk or a bookkeeper." She tried to sound confident, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "I'll figure it out. You could come with me." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their directness. Natalie stared at Tom, unable to process what he was suggesting. "What? To my cousin's ranch? You could come with me." Tom leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression earnest. "I know we've only known each other a day, and I know this sounds crazy. But ranches always need help, especially with the books and correspondence. My cousin's wife manages a lot of that, but with 3 little ones underfoot, she's overwhelmed. They'd probably be glad for an educated woman who knows her way around numbers. I couldn't possibly impose on your family." "You wouldn't be imposing. You'd be working, earning your keep." Tom reached out and very gently took her hand. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, warm and steady. "Natalie, I know you're scared. I know you don't know what comes next, but you don't have to figure it all out alone. Let me help you. Let me give you a chance to land somewhere safe, somewhere you can catch your breath and decide what you really want." Natalie looked down at their joined hands, felt the sincerity in his grip. Every practical bone in her body said she should refuse, should maintain her independence, should not accept charity from a man she barely knew. But there was something else, something quieter and deeper, that whispered maybe this was exactly what she needed. Maybe running into Tom Vance on that train platform had been more than coincidence. Maybe it had been fate. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "Because when I saw you running for that train, something in me recognized something in you. We're the same, you and I. We've both lost things that mattered. We've both had to start over with nothing. And because the moment you sat down in this seat, I knew that meeting you meant something. I don't understand it, and I'm not saying it makes sense. But I believe in listening to instinct, and my instinct says you're supposed to be in my life." Natalie felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were different from the frightened tears of yesterday. These were tears of relief, of hope, of something that felt dangerously close to joy. "I don't even know you. Then get to know me. We've got another full day on this train, and then however long it takes to reach the ranch. Use that time. Ask me anything you want. Test me, challenge me, decide for yourself if I'm worth trusting." His grip on her hand tightened just slightly. "All I'm asking is that you don't face whatever comes next alone, not when you don't have to." She should have said no. She should have thanked him politely and gone her own way. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "All right. Yes, I'll come with you." The smile that broke across Tom's face was like sunrise, bright and warming and full of promise. "You won't regret it. I swear to you, Natalie, you won't regret it." They talked through the rest of that day and into the evening, the conversation flowing as naturally as a river. Natalie asked Tom about ranch life, about what she could expect, about his cousin and his family. Tom painted a picture of a sprawling operation in the mountains, of hard work and simple pleasures, of community dinners and Sunday gatherings where neighbors came from miles around to share news and food. It sounded almost too good to be true, but the way Tom described it, with such genuine affection and detail, made her believe it might be real. In turn, Tom asked Natalie about her teaching, about her favorite books and subjects, about what she hoped for in life. She found herself sharing dreams she had barely admitted to herself, hopes for a real home, for work that mattered, for a life that was more than just surviving. And as she talked, she watched Tom's face and saw not judgment or pity, but understanding and respect. The train stopped again at sunset, this time at a larger depot with a restaurant and a general store. Tom insisted on buying them a proper meal, hot stew and fresh bread that tasted like heaven after a day and a half of trail rations. They sat across from each other at a small table, and Natalie caught herself staring at the way the lamplight played across Tom's features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the laugh lines around his eyes, the genuine warmth in his expression. "What are you thinking about?" Tom asked, catching her stare. Natalie felt her cheeks heat. "Just that I'm grateful for your kindness, for not asking more questions than I was ready to answer. Everyone's got a past, Natalie. What matters is what we do next." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "And I'm glad you're choosing to do the next part with me." They returned to the train as the last call was sounding, both of them fuller and more content than they had been. The car was less crowded now, several passengers having departed at the larger depot. Tom and Natalie had their bench to themselves, with a bit more room to stretch out. As night fell again, Tom gestured to his shoulder. You can rest against me if you want. Seemed like you slept better that way last night." Natalie knew she should maintain propriety, should keep a respectable distance. But the truth was, she had slept better with her head on his shoulder, had felt safer and more at peace than she had in longer than she could remember. So she settled against his side, felt his arm come around her shoulders in a gesture that was protective rather than possessive, and let her eyes drift closed. "Tom," she murmured, half asleep already. "Yeah, thank you, for not letting me travel alone today." She felt rather than heard his response, a soft rumble in his chest that might have been words or might have been simply contentment. Either way, it soothed her into sleep, and she didn't wake until morning light was streaming through the windows and Tom was gently shaking her shoulder. "We're coming into the Colorado border," he said. "Another few hours and we'll be at the depot nearest the ranch." Natalie sat up, suddenly aware that her hair was a mess and she probably looked terrible. She tried to smooth down the worst of it, feeling self-conscious. But Tom just smiled at her, that same warm, genuine smile that made her feel like maybe she didn't need to be perfect, like maybe being herself was enough. The landscape outside had changed dramatically overnight. They were in proper mountains now, great peaks covered in pine trees, valleys cut by rushing streams. It was beautiful in a way that made Natalie's chest ache, so different from the high desert of Idaho Territory. This felt alive, green and growing, full of possibility. They shared the last of Tom's provisions for breakfast, and then there was nothing to do but wait as the train climbed higher into the mountains. Other passengers pointed out wildlife, elk grazing in meadows, and eagles circling overhead. Children pressed their faces to the windows, exclaiming over everything. The conductor walked through, announcing their imminent arrival at the next depot. Tom gathered his small pack, checking to make sure he had everything. "My cousin knows I'm coming, but he won't be expecting anyone with me." "That all right. I don't want to cause problems for your family." "You won't. James is good people. His wife Ruth is even better. They'll welcome you, I promise." Tom stood as the train began to slow, offering his hand to help Natalie up. "Ready." She took his hand, felt the now familiar warmth of his touch, and nodded. "Ready." The depot was small, barely more than a platform and a water tower, but there was a wagon waiting with a man who was clearly Tom's cousin. James Vance was a few years older than Tom, broader in the shoulders, with the same amber-brown eyes and an easy smile. He greeted Tom with a hearty handshake and a clap on the back, then turned his attention to Natalie with friendly curiosity. "James, this is Natalie Foster. She's going to be coming to the ranch with us, if that's all right with you and Ruth." Tom's voice was casual, but Natalie could hear the underlying tension, the hope that his cousin would agree. James studied Natalie for a moment, his gaze shrewd but not unkind. "Ruth's been complaining for months that she needs help with the books and the correspondence. You got experience with that sort of thing, Miss Foster?" "I do. I taught school and kept books for a business in Idaho Territory." Natalie lifted her chin, meeting James's gaze directly. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Vance, and I'm good with numbers. If you'll give me a chance, I'll prove my worth. Anyone who's willing to work is welcome on my ranch." James gestured to the wagon. "Come on then, both of you. It's about an hour's ride to the homestead, and Ruth will have dinner waiting." The ride through the mountains was beautiful, the wagon following a well-worn trail that wound through forests and meadows. Tom sat beside Natalie in the wagon bed, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about visits to the ranch when he was younger. James drove the wagon, occasionally chiming in with his own memories or updates about the ranch's operations. As they crested a final rise, the ranch spread out below them in a wide valley. There was a main house, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and corrals where horses and cattle grazed. Smoke rose from the house's chimney, and even from a distance, Natalie could see that the place was well maintained, prosperous in the way that came from hard work and careful management. "There she is," Tom said softly, and Natalie couldn't tell if he was talking about the ranch or the woman who emerged from the house as the wagon approached. Ruth Vance was a petite woman with blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a smile that lit up her entire face. 3 children tumbled out behind her, ranging in age from perhaps 3 to 7, all clamoring for their father's attention. James swung down from the wagon and scooped up the smallest child, a little girl with pigtails, while the 2 boys climbed into the wagon bed to greet their uncle. "Tom Vance, you're a sight for sore eyes," Ruth called out, then her gaze landed on Natalie. "And who's this you've brought with you?" Tom helped Natalie down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Ruth, this is Natalie Foster. She's had some trouble in Idaho and needed a fresh start. I told her you could use help with the books and such." Ruth's eyes moved between Tom and Natalie, and something knowing and pleased flickered across her face. "Is that so? Well, Miss Foster, any friend of Tom's is welcome here. Come inside and let's get you settled. You both must be exhausted from the journey." The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of baking bread and roasting meat. Ruth showed Natalie to a small but comfortable room off the kitchen, explaining that it had been her sewing room but could easily be converted to a bedroom. There was a narrow bed, a washstand, a small desk near the window that looked out over the valley. "It's not much, but it's private and it's yours," Ruth said. "We can talk about wages and such after you've had a chance to rest. For now, just make yourself comfortable. Dinner will be ready in about an hour." Left alone, Natalie sank down onto the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the past 2 days. She had fled her home, met a stranger, agreed to follow him to an unknown place, and somehow ended up here in this warm house with these kind people. It seemed impossible, like something from a story rather than real life. But it was real. The bed beneath her was real. The mountain air coming through the window was real, and most of all, Tom was real. There was a soft knock on the door. "Natalie, you decent? Come in." Tom entered, ducking his head slightly under the low door frame. He had taken off his hat and run his fingers through his hair, and there was something almost shy in his expression. "Just wanted to make sure you were settling in all right. Your cousin and his wife are very kind. They're good people." Tom moved closer, stopping a few feet from where she sat. "Natalie, I know this is all happening fast. If you need time, if you need space to think about things, just say the word. I don't want you to feel pressured or trapped." She stood up, closing the distance between them until she could look directly into his eyes. "I don't feel trapped. I feel like maybe, for the first time in a very long time, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Tom's breath caught, and she saw hope and something deeper flash across his face. "I'm glad. Because I've got to tell you, Natalie, these past 2 days with you, they've meant more to me than I know how to say. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I care about you. More than I probably should after such a short time." "It doesn't feel short," Natalie said softly. "It feels like I've known you much longer." "Yeah." Tom reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers gentle. "It does, doesn't it?" They stood there for a long moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Natalie's heart was racing, her breath coming faster, and she knew that if Tom kissed her right now, she wouldn't pull away. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back, giving her space, respecting the invisible boundaries that still existed between them. "We should get ready for dinner," he said, his voice slightly rough. Ruth's cooking is too good to miss. Dinner was a lively affair, the table crowded with James and Ruth, their 3 children, Tom and Natalie. The food was delicious, simple but abundant, and the conversation flowed easily. The children peppered Tom with questions about his journey, and Ruth asked Natalie polite but genuinely interested questions about her teaching experience. By the time the meal ended, and Ruth was shooing everyone out so she could clean up, Natalie felt more relaxed than she had in months. "Let me help with the dishes," Natalie offered. "I won't say no to that," Ruth said with a laugh. "Tom, why don't you go show Natalie around the ranch a bit before it gets full dark? I can handle this." Tom took Natalie on a walking tour of the property, showing her the barn where the horses nickered softly in their stalls, the chicken coop where Ruth's hens were settling in for the night, the garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. They walked up a slight rise behind the house to where a bench sat under an old cottonwood tree, overlooking the entire valley. "James built this bench for Ruth on their first anniversary," Tom said as they sat down. "Said she deserved a place to rest and appreciate what they'd built together. It's beautiful up here." Natalie looked out over the ranch, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge. "Your cousin has a good life." "He does. He worked hard for it, but he's been lucky too. Right partner, right piece of land, right timing." Tom turned to look at her, his expression serious in the growing darkness. "Natalie, I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" "When I saw you on that train platform, running like your life depended on it, something inside me just knew. I can't explain it any better than that. I looked at you and I knew that you were going to matter to me, that whatever happened next, you needed to be part of it." He took her hand, cradling it between both of his. "These 2 days, getting to know you, learning about your life and your dreams, it's only made me more certain. I'm falling for you, Natalie. Maybe I've already fallen. I know it's too soon to say that. I know you probably think I'm crazy, but I had to be honest with you." Natalie felt tears well up in her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I don't think you're crazy, or if you are, then I am too. Because I feel it as well, Tom. This connection between us, it's like nothing I've ever experienced. I keep waiting for it to fade or for me to wake up and realize it was just fear and exhaustion making me imagine things. But it doesn't fade. It only gets stronger. So what do we do about it?" Tom asked softly. "We give it time. We let it grow. We see where it takes us." Natalie squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Tom. I'm staying right here, working for your cousin, building a life. And if that life includes you, well, I think I'd like that very much." Tom lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'd like that too, more than anything." They sat together under the cottonwood tree until the stars filled the entire sky, talking quietly about everything and nothing, their hands intertwined, their shoulders touching. When they finally walked back to the house, Natalie felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid, tangible hope that the future might hold something good. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Natalie took over managing the ranch's books, which had indeed become chaotic under Ruth's well-meaning but overwhelmed care. She organized receipts, balanced ledgers, wrote correspondence to buyers and suppliers. She also helped Ruth with the children, teaching them their letters and numbers in the afternoons while Ruth handled the endless tasks of running a household. Tom worked alongside James and the ranch hands, mending fences, herding cattle, breaking horses. He was good at the work, patient and skilled, and James quickly came to rely on him. In the evenings after dinner, Tom and Natalie would find excuses to be together. They walked in the gardens, sat under the cottonwood tree, talked by the fire when the nights grew cool. Their relationship deepened slowly, carefully, both of them aware that what they were building was too precious to rush. Tom never pushed for more than Natalie was ready to give. He held her hand, brushed kisses across her forehead, wrapped his arms around her when she grew quiet and sad, thinking about the life she had left behind. But he didn't demand anything more, didn't pressure her for promises she wasn't ready to make. About a month after their arrival, a letter came to the ranch addressed to Natalie. She recognized the handwriting immediately, and her hands shook as she opened it. It was from Mrs. Patterson, the woman who had sponsored her education in Boise. "Dear Natalie," the letter began. "I heard about the troubles in Ruby City, and I hope this letter finds you safe. The man you saw, Dixon Merrill, was arrested 3 weeks ago for another crime. In the process, the truth about the saloon incident came to light. Several witnesses came forward once they knew he was in custody, and he has been charged with murder. You are no longer in any danger from him or his family. The marshal wanted me to pass along that you are free to return home if you wish, and that you might be called upon to testify at the trial. However, I understand if you have built a new life elsewhere and do not wish to come back. Whatever you decide, know that you have my support and my admiration for the courage you showed in surviving such a frightening situation. With fondest regards, Mrs. Patterson." Natalie read the letter 3 times, her emotions swirling. Relief that the threat was gone, that Dixon Merrill would face justice. Gratitude that Mrs. Patterson had thought to track her down and let her know. But underneath it all, a curious absence of desire to return to Idaho. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone smaller and more frightened than the woman she was becoming here in the Colorado mountains. She found Tom in the barn, grooming one of the horses. He looked up as she entered, his face breaking into a smile that faded when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" She handed him the letter without a word. He read it carefully, his brow furrowing in concentration. When he finished, he looked at her with concern. "Are you all right?" "I don't know what I am." Natalie leaned against the stable wall, suddenly exhausted. "I should be happy, right? The man who threatened me is in custody. I'm safe now. I could go back if I wanted to." "You want to?" Tom's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry in his eyes. "No." The word came out stronger and more certain than she expected. "No, I don't want to go back. There's nothing for me there. Everything I want is here." Tom set down the grooming brush and crossed to her in 3 long strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Are you sure? I don't want you staying just because you think you have to, or because you feel obligated to me. I'm staying because this is where I want to be, because your cousin and Ruth have become like family, because this ranch feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in years." She reached up and covered his hands with hers. "And because I love you, Tom Vance. I love you and I want to build a life with you, here in these mountains." Tom's eyes went wide, and for a moment he just stared at her, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. Then he was kissing her, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once, full of all the longing and hope and love that had been building between them for weeks. Natalie kissed him back, her arms going around his neck, her body fitting against his like they had been made for each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tom rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too. God, Natalie, I love you so much. I have since that first day on the train, I think. Nobody travels solo today," Natalie whispered, remembering his words. "Never again." Tom kissed her once more, soft and sweet. "We travel together from now on if you'll have me. I'll have you," she smiled against his lips. "For as long as you'll stay. That'll be forever then." They married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch, with James and Ruth standing up for them and half the valley's ranchers and their families in attendance. Ruth had helped Natalie make a dress from cream-colored linen, simple but beautiful, and Tom wore his best clothes with a new hat he had bought specially for the occasion. The local minister performed the service under the cottonwood tree, and when Tom kissed his bride, cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. The celebration lasted into the evening with food and music and dancing. Natalie had never felt so happy, so surrounded by warmth and community. These people, most of whom she had only known for a few weeks, had welcomed her as one of their own. They brought gifts, offered advice, shared stories about Tom's childhood that made him blush and everyone else laugh. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, James pulled Tom aside. Natalie saw them talking seriously, saw James hand Tom something, saw the shock and then the fierce joy on Tom's face. He came back to her with tears in his eyes. "James is giving us land," Tom said, his voice choked with emotion. 100 acres on the north edge of his property where that creek runs through. Says it's our wedding present so we can build our own place, start our own ranch. Natalie felt her own tears start to fall. "Tom, that's incredible. He says he knows what it's like to want to build something of your own. Says I've earned it with all the work I've done these past months." Tom pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "We're going to have our own place, Natalie. Our own home." They spent that night in the small room off the kitchen, which Ruth had decorated with wildflowers and fresh linens. It was their wedding night, intimate and tender, full of whispered promises and gentle discoveries. And in the morning, when Natalie woke wrapped in Tom's arms, she thought about that day at the train station in Ruby City, about how terrified and alone she had felt, and marveled at how completely her life had changed. Over the next year, they built their home on the land James had given them. It was hard work, but good work, the kind that left them tired and satisfied at the end of each day. Tom proved to be skilled with carpentry, and with help from James and some of the neighboring ranchers, they raised a sturdy house with a wide porch and windows that looked out over the mountains. Natalie planted a garden, started a small flock of chickens, helped Tom select cattle to start their own herd. They worked alongside each other, partners in every sense of the word. Tom consulted Natalie on every decision, valued her opinion and her business sense. Natalie learned the rhythms of ranch life, learned to ride a horse properly, learned to shoot in case she needed to defend their home from predators or worse. They were building something together, something that belonged to both of them equally. On their first anniversary, Tom took Natalie back to the cottonwood tree where he had first told her he loved her. He had built a bench there too, just like the one James had made for Ruth. "I wanted you to have your own place to rest and appreciate what we've built," Tom said, echoing the words he had told her a year ago. "Our own spot, just for us." They sat together and looked out over their land, their home, the life they had created. Natalie leaned her head on Tom's shoulder, feeling perfectly content. "Do you ever think about that day on the train, about how different things could have been, all the time?" Tom kissed the top of her head. "I think about how I almost didn't get on that train, almost waited another day. I think about how you almost didn't make it to the platform in time, all the tiny things that had to go right for us to find each other." "I think we would have found each other anyway," Natalie said softly. "Somehow, some way, this was always meant to be. You really believe that?" "I do. I believe that some things are just fated, Tom. And you and me, we're one of those things." The next few years were good ones, full of hard work and simple joys. Their ranch prospered, their herd grew, they became respected members of the community. Natalie still did bookkeeping work for several of the neighboring ranches, earning money that she saved carefully. Tom built a barn, then a larger chicken coop, then a smokehouse. They talked about the future, about dreams and plans and all the things they wanted to accomplish together. In the spring of their third year of marriage, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but hadn't said anything, wanting to be sure. When she finally told Tom, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're going to be parents." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Natalie continued working almost until the very end, despite Tom's worried hovering. Ruth was an invaluable source of advice and support, having been through it 3 times herself. And in November, on a snowy evening with the midwife in attendance and Tom pacing holes in the floor of the next room, Natalie gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, after Tom's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's amber-brown eyes, and from the first moment Tom held him, Natalie knew that their son had his father's heart completely. "Hello, Sam," Tom whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world, little man. Your mama and I have been waiting for you." Being parents changed them in ways both small and profound. Their days revolved around Sam's needs, his feeding schedule, his naps, his cries and coos and eventual first smiles. Tom was a devoted father, patient and gentle, singing to Sam in a surprisingly good baritone, rocking him for hours when he was fussy. Natalie marveled at how naturally fatherhood came to him, how he had taken to it without hesitation or complaint. When Sam was 6 months old, James and Ruth came to dinner and brought news that sent ripples through the entire valley. The railroad was planning to extend a spur line through their area, which would make it much easier to transport cattle to market. It was an opportunity for all of them to expand their operations, to reach buyers they had never been able to access before. "This could change everything," James said, his excitement evident. "We could double our herds, maybe triple them if the market's good." Tom and Natalie talked long into the night after their guests had left, Sam sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside their bed. It was a big decision. Expansion meant taking on debt, hiring more hands, risking everything they had built. But it also meant securing their future, building something that could support their family for generations. "What do you think?" Tom asked, trusting Natalie's judgment on financial matters. "I think we should do it," Natalie said, "but carefully. We expand gradually, take on manageable debt, make sure we can handle the increased workload. And we do it together, like we do everything else." So they expanded, taking out a loan from the bank in town, hiring 2 ranch hands to help with the increased work. It was exhausting, challenging, sometimes scary. But they worked as a team, supporting each other through the difficulties, celebrating the successes together. And slowly, steadily, their ranch grew into something larger and more prosperous than either of them had initially dreamed. Sam grew into a bright, active toddler, always underfoot, always curious about everything. He adored his father, followed Tom around like a shadow whenever he was allowed. Natalie often found them together in the barn, Tom patiently explaining about the horses or the cattle while Sam listened with wide, serious eyes. When Sam was 2, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, leaving her tired and often sick. Tom worried constantly, taking on more of the household tasks, insisting she rest more than she wanted to. But despite the difficulties, when their second child was born in early spring, another boy they named Henry after Natalie's father, she felt nothing but joy. Henry was different from Sam, quieter and more contemplative even as an infant. Where Sam had been all energy and noise, Henry was content to observe, to watch the world with thoughtful eyes. Tom joked that Henry had gotten Natalie's bookkeeper temperament while Sam had inherited his rancher blood. The years continued to pass, full of both challenges and triumphs. They lost cattle to a hard winter, but recouped their losses the following year with excellent prices. Tom broke his arm when a horse threw him, but recovered fully. Natalie's bookkeeping business grew until she was managing accounts for most of the ranches in the valley. Sam started school at a small schoolhouse that had been built a few miles away and proved to be as bright as his mother had hoped. On their 10th anniversary, Tom took Natalie back to their bench under the cottonwood tree. The boys were with Ruth for the evening, giving them a rare night alone together. They sat close, comfortable in the silence that came from years of knowing each other completely. "Do you remember what you said on our first anniversary?" Tom asked. "About how we would have found each other anyway." "I remember. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about fate and chance and all the things that had to happen for us to end up here." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "I don't know if fate is real, Natalie, but I know that finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our boys, this life we've built, it's more than I ever dreamed I could have." Natalie felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from being so full of love it had to overflow. "I feel the same way. When I think about that day, running for the train, so scared and alone, and then you sitting down beside me and saying nobody travels solo today. It changed everything." "We've had a good decade," Tom said. "We have. And we'll have many more, God willing." They did have more years, many of them, each one adding its own stories and memories to their family history. Sam grew into a tall, confident young man who loved ranch work as much as his father did. Henry proved to have a gift for numbers, and eventually took over much of the bookkeeping work from his mother, freeing her to focus on other projects. When Sam was 12 and Henry 10, Natalie had one more baby, a daughter they named Lily, who had her father's amber eyes and her mother's dark hair and a personality that was somehow both her brothers combined. Tom aged well, his hair going silver at the temples, his face gaining lines that only made him more handsome in Natalie's eyes. She teased him about becoming distinguished, and he teased her right back about the reading glasses she now needed for close work. But the love between them never dimmed, never became routine or taken for granted. They still sat under the cottonwood tree on summer evenings, still held hands when they walked through their land, still found time to be alone together and remember what had brought them together in the first place. The railroad spur came through as promised, and with it came prosperity to the entire valley. Their ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Tom and James, working together, helped establish a cattlemen's association that protected the interests of all the local ranchers. Natalie became involved in efforts to improve the local school, raising money to hire better teachers and buy more books. They became pillars of the community, the kind of people others looked to for wisdom and leadership. But they never forgot where they had come from, never forgot that they had both started with nothing and built everything through hard work, faith, and most importantly, love for each other. When Sam turned 18, he announced his intention to start his own ranch on the far edge of their property. Tom and Natalie gave him land and cattle and their blessing, watching with pride as he began building his own life. A year later, Sam married a sweet girl from town named Rebecca, and within another year made Tom and Natalie grandparents for the first time. Henry proved less interested in ranching and more interested in business. He went to Denver to study law, supported by his parents who wanted nothing more than for their children to find their own paths. He came home for visits as often as he could, bringing news from the city, and eventually bringing home a wife of his own, a smart woman named Caroline who worked as a teacher. Lily grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's courage. She refused to be confined by expectations of what a woman should be, learning to rope and ride as well as any cowboy, while also excelling in her studies. Natalie saw so much of herself in her daughter, that same determination to forge her own path, and she encouraged Lily in everything she attempted. On their 25th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the original ranch house for a celebration. Sam and Rebecca were there with their 3 children. Henry and Caroline came from Denver. Lily helped Ruth, who was now in her 60s but still spry, prepare a feast that could feed an army. James, his hair now completely white, gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. 25 years ago, James said, raising his glass, my cousin showed up at my door with a woman he'd known for all of 2 days and asked if she could stay. I thought he'd lost his mind, but Tom has always been smarter than I gave him credit for, because he knew a good thing when he saw it. Here's to Tom and Natalie, to love at first sight, to taking chances, and to building something that lasts. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Tom pulled Natalie close and kissed her in front of everyone, not caring that their children groaned in embarrassment and their grandchildren giggled. When he pulled back, he was smiling that same smile that had won her heart all those years ago. "Still glad you got on that train?" he asked softly. "Every single day," Natalie answered. "Best decision I ever made, running for that train. Second best was letting you sit beside me." They danced that night, swaying to music played on a fiddle by one of their neighbors, surrounded by family and friends and the life they had built together. Natalie looked around at all of it, at the love and joy and community, and felt overwhelmingly grateful. That frightened girl who had run for a train in Ruby City seemed like a different person now, someone from another lifetime. She had become someone stronger, someone more confident, someone who knew her own worth and never doubted her place in the world. The years continued to flow by, bringing changes both joyful and sad. James passed away when Tom and Natalie were in their early 50s, and they mourned him deeply, but also celebrated the long and happy life he had lived. Ruth eventually moved into a smaller house on Sam's property, where she could be near her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren, filling the valley with new generations who would carry on the legacy. Tom and Natalie grew old together, their bodies slower but their spirits still strong. They made a point of sitting under the cottonwood tree every evening when weather permitted, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories or discussing family news. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence, communicating in the wordless way that came from decades of partnership. On their 50th anniversary, their entire extended family gathered again, now so large they had to hold the celebration outdoors. There were children running everywhere, laughter filling the air, long tables groaning under the weight of contributed dishes. Tom and Natalie sat in places of honor, watching it all with wonder and contentment. Sam, now a middle-aged man with his own grown children, stood to give a speech. 50 years ago, my father met a woman on a train and decided in the span of a day that she was the one he wanted to spend his life with. Now, I thought that was a crazy story when I first heard it as a child. How could you know someone after just one day? But watching my parents over the years, seeing how they've loved each other through good times and hard times, how they've built this family and this legacy together, I understand now. Sometimes you just know. Sometimes love doesn't need time to grow because it arrives fully formed, and all you can do is nurture it and protect it and be grateful for every day you get to share it. Dad, Mom, thank you for showing all of us what real love looks like. Thank you for building this family, for creating a place where we all belong. Happy anniversary. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering as Tom and Natalie stood together, accepting hugs and congratulations from their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. When the celebration finally began to wind down and families started heading home, Tom and Natalie took one last walk around the property together, just the two of them. 50 years, Natalie said, shaking her head in amazement. Where did the time go into all of this? Tom gestured at the land, the homes, the evidence of the family they had created. Every single day was worth it. They stopped under the cottonwood tree, standing where they had stood so many times over the decades. The bench Tom had built was still there, worn smooth by years of use. They sat together, and Natalie leaned her head on Tom's shoulder just like she had that first night on the train a lifetime ago. "You have any regrets?" she asked. "Not a single one." Tom kissed the top of her head, white now instead of dark, but still beloved. "Well, maybe one. I wish I had more years ahead to spend with you." "We have today," Natalie said. "That's all anyone ever really has. Today and each other and the love we share. That's enough." "More than enough," Tom agreed. "It's everything." They sat together as the stars came out. The same stars that had watched over them for 50 years, that would continue watching over their children and grandchildren long after they were gone. Natalie thought about that frightened girl on the train platform, and about the kind cowboy who had decided she shouldn't travel alone. She thought about all the choices and chances that had led to this moment, to this life, to this overwhelming sense of peace and completion. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For sitting beside me. For not letting me travel alone. For loving me all these years." Tom tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger who probably seemed half crazy. Thank you for building this life with me." They sat under the stars until long after full dark, two people who had become one through years of shared joy and sorrow, who had built something lasting and true out of a chance meeting on a train. And when they finally walked back to their house, hand in hand, they did so knowing that whatever time they had left, they would spend it together, just as they had spent every day since that fateful afternoon when Tom Vance had sat down beside Natalie Foster and told her that nobody travels solo today. The years that remained to them were peaceful ones, filled with quiet contentment and the joy of watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They both lived well into their 70s, defying the shorter life expectancies of their era through good fortune and strong constitutions. When Tom finally passed, it was peacefully in his sleep, Natalie beside him as she had been every night of their marriage. And when Natalie followed him just 6 months later, their children said it was because she couldn't bear to be without him, that her heart had simply decided it was time to join his. They were buried together under the cottonwood tree, the place that had witnessed so much of their love story. The entire valley turned out for the funeral, a testament to the lives they had lived and the community they had helped build. Sam, Henry, and Lily stood together at the graveside, united in their grief, but also in their gratitude for the parents they had been blessed with. The ranch continued under Sam's management, eventually passing to his own children and then to theirs. Henry's legal practice in Denver grew prestigious, and he never forgot to credit his mother's early lessons in reading and numbers for his success. Lily, true to her independent spirit, became a teacher like her mother had been, influencing generations of children in the valley. And the story of Tom and Natalie became part of the family legend, told and retold at gatherings, shared with each new generation as an example of what love could be when it was real and true and committed. The story of how a cowboy saw a woman boarding a train alone, bought the seat beside her, and told her that nobody travels solo today, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love that lasted 50 years and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Their bench remained under the cottonwood tree, maintained carefully by their descendants, a place where couples in the family still came to talk about their futures, to make important decisions, to remember the love story that had started it all. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind rustled through the leaves and the sun painted the mountains in shades of gold, those who sat there swore they could feel the presence of Tom and Natalie, still watching over the family and the land they had loved so well, still together, even in whatever came after this life. The end of their story was really just the beginning of countless other stories, the ripples of their love spreading outward through time and generation, touching lives they would never meet, creating possibilities they could never have imagined. Because that's what real love does. It doesn't end when the lovers pass. It continues, transforming into something larger and more enduring, living on in the lives it touched and the lessons it taught. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when bodies fail, Tom and Natalie were together still, holding hands and watching over the beautiful legacy they had created, grateful for every moment of the journey they had shared, from that first meeting on a train platform to the very end and beyond. Because some love stories don't have endings. They just keep going, forever and always, as eternal as the mountains and the stars.